All right, everybody. Well, welcome to Nonprofit Cafe. Thanks so much for being here. Today, we're diving into documentation, the HR Essential with Ann Donovan of Donovan HR Solutions. My name is Chloe Leffelholtz, and I am the Nonprofit Programming Manager at One Valley Community Foundation, your host of Nonprofit Cafe. Our mission is to connect people who care to causes that matter to ensure that all can thrive in Gallatin County. And providing free nonprofit professional development is one of the ways we do that. A big thank you to our sponsor, First Security Bank, who supports this free professional development opportunity as well for you all. A couple housekeeping items before I turn it over to our speaker is Ann and I would love to know who's in the room this morning with us on Zoom. So if you could put into the chat your name, organization, and your biggest fear when it comes to HR documentation, we'd love to get to know you over Zoom. So that's name, organization, and then biggest fear when it comes to HR documentation. Just gonna put that out there to start. Hmm. And while you all are doing that, a few other housekeeping items. Please keep yourself muted unless you're actively speaking as we're gathering virtually. We will have plenty of time at the end for Q&A, and during that time, you're welcome to unmute yourself and ask all your questions. If you are able to this morning, we really encourage you to have your camera on. It's way more fun to chat with faces on this Friday morning. As you'll see, the session is being recorded and these slides will be emailed to you afterwards. And if you have any questions or if there's anything that I can do to make this session more accessible to you, you can go ahead and chat with me in the chat box. I'll be ready to answer there. All right, and I see some good, not good biggest fears, but I see some real fears from folks about HR documentation from staff, giving valuable feedback to doing it wrong, making mistakes, document retention, the liability of it all. We're going to get into it. So, the reason we're here today is to learn more about the HR essential of documentation across the entire employee life cycle. I'm so grateful to have Ann here with us today. Through Donovan HR Solutions, Ann brings a really strong HR foundation and a passion for helping people and organizations thrive. So, Ann, I'm going to pass it your way with a big virtual round of applause.
Thank you, Chloe. Thank you, One Valley, for having me. And thank you to all attendees for being here. I am excited to share with you because I'm an HR nerd and I talk about this stuff all day long. I dream about it and I do it so that you don't have to. You can call people like me and say, Ann, what do I do with this? We will talk about HR essentials and documentation. I walk through the one moment there. So I'll walk through the processes and documentation through the employee life cycle, beginning with compensation and benefits, talking about recruitment, interviewing, onboarding, training and development, performance management. I saw a chat about giving staff feedback, so we'll talk about the documentation around those tough conversations. Safety, I being in Montana, we have our own dedicated safety regulations called the Montana Safety Culture Act. So I'll talk about that and the documentation surrounding safety as well as OSHA and then offboarding. And as I go through and I see all of your chats come in, there are some real fears out there. One of my biggest fears is making a mistake and doing it wrong and then costing the organization a bunch of money. I saw somebody mention liability, and there can be liability. Um, the document retention, how long do I have to hold on to this? The organization of it all. Do you file electronically? Do you hold on to those paper files? And now with technology, it seems like it's changing every single day. So how do we keep up with all of it? And so we'll talk about document retention. And then if there's anything else out there that comes to mind, just put it in the chat. And Chloe is extraordinary at what she does. So she'll make sure that we see those and we get your thoughts and questions addressed. If you do have any questions throughout, please put them in the chat. We'll address them as they come up, just because I feel that that's easier rather than waiting to the end and I'm thinking, oh, I forgot about that one. So throw those into the chat or raise your hand and come on camera to ask a question. And then uh, let's do this. I have about an hour, 10, hour and 15 in presentation materials. And so I really do want to hear your questions and address them. So as you're sitting around and you're working through employee situations or you're onboarding somebody or you're having one of those conversations and feedback sessions, asking yourself, do I need to document this? Probably. HR's favorite answer is, well, it depends. And so when thinking about documentation, it can be beneficial to an organization. It can help keep you organized. It can help retain your or jog your memory. But as somebody mentioned, it can be a liability. Any documentation that you, or most documentation that you produce in certain situations may be read by somebody else. It may be put out there for public consumption. And so knowing when and where to document is important. As I work through the employee life cycle, I document a lot. When I first started in my HR career, I was furiously taking notes and documenting everything. And I realized sometimes it wasn't the best use of my time. But then other times it's beneficial because it does help me jog my memory. If I'm working through an employee situation or disciplinary situation with them, I want to document so that I have something to refer to in the end. So, do I need to document this? Probably, or maybe not. It depends. I'll walk through certain aspects of documentation and what you do need to document. I'll walk through some compliance. I am not an attorney. This is not legal advice. Another piece of advice that I give is that yes, we will make mistakes when we're doing this. Nobody's perfect. Used to be so terrified of writing anything down that I would revise it and revise it and revise it. But again, that's not the best use of my time. So, but keeping in mind that sticking to just the facts is a good piece of advice when documenting something. Don't throw, not throwing opinions out there or editorializing anything can really benefit in the terms of documentation. As I mentioned, I walk through the employee life cycle, and the employee life cycle, as I see it, is the foundation is mission, vision, values, having the core who we are as an organization and where are we going so that we can all work towards a common goal is the base foundation. And you in the nonprofit sector, you're all about that mission and values and leaning into who you are and who you serve to identify where you're going. And then compensation and benefits I see as the next. The bare minimum is to pay fairly and competitively. And that means different things. Can you pay fairly to the market? But you also need to look at your organization and how you're paying and what you're able to pay within your organization. The Fair Labor Standards Act is the piece of legislation. It's been around for 85 or so years. My math is not the best, but it's been around for a while. It's what establishes employee classifications like exempt and non exempt, and overtime rates, minimum wage. In terms of documentation around compensation, it's good to have a clearly laid out compensation philosophy and the steps that you take to determine somebody's rate of pay. This helps with equal employment and equal pay, to say we are paying Anne X amount of dollars because of our values, our mission, the work that she does, having clearly written job descriptions to can help with the identification of salary. Having clearly defined benefit plans if you offer benefits. That helps not only with the compliance piece and determining fair pay, but also with you can just hand your employee the benefits plan so that they can refer to it and they can know what benefits are offered. It can reduce the number of questions that you get. I'm working with a few startups right now, and as we identify the benefits plans and create them, they're thinking, well, we used to offer an IRA and a pension plan, and we think that our medical benefits kick in after 90 days. And so we're collecting all of the information so it's in one place. We don't have to rely on our memories to when we are recruiting and interviewing for employees. And it's all just right there that we can hand to the employee and say, these are the benefits that we offer. Payroll records, hold on to your payroll records. The it can it helps reduce liability. It if employees have questions about their pay, you can go back to the records. And in terms of documentation retention, there are some regulations around how long you need to hold on to things. With payroll records, again, I'm not an attorney, nor am I a tax advisor, but most companies I work with and organizations hold on to them for 6 years plus one. And so we're in 2025. If you have payroll records from 2015, that's probably going back too far. But holding on to payroll records from 2018, you're probably in a good spot. And then time cards. Some organizations, as they're starting, or they may not have a timekeeping system that's digital, they may keep handwritten time cards, or they may have employees send in an email at the end of the pay period saying, I worked 5 days a week, 8 hours a day, 40 hours. But if you can, but keep time cards that say, I clocked in at 8 a.m., I was out for lunch at 11:30, back in at 12:30, and out at 4:59. It's just helps with reducing liability and risk to have exact time cards in the event that an employee questions their pay, or they may go to the Department of Labor and say, I worked 41 hours, but was only paid for 40. So having those very specific time cards helps in many scenarios. And then having your compensation structure and policy written out and defined so that it can reduce questions. As I mentioned, the startups that I'm working with, it takes away some of that gray area and can help you when making decisions about, oh, we need to create a position. How are we going to determine pay? Somebody came to me and asked for a pay raise. How can I determine if it's fair, if we should give one, etc. So documenting compensation and benefits is key. And then recruiting compliance and documentation. As I mentioned, having clearly written job descriptions can help reduce a lot of questions. I was in my very first job in HR, I was an HR administrative assistant, and an employee came to me and said, a manager just told me I had to vacuum the room. And that's not in my job description. I'm like, let's go look at what the job description says. And I couldn't find any job description. So I asked my boss, what are we doing with job descriptions? And they said, it's company policy. We don't do them because it just broadens things. So some companies do have job descriptions, others don't. Over the course of my career, I have found them to be incredibly beneficial, and having clearly written job descriptions so that it can reduce ambiguity with employees. Some employees really need to have clearly defined jobs, have clearly defined expectations so that they know what they're doing and where they're going. On days when I'm working on a project and I come to a lull, I'm looking for something that I just need to do. I take out my job description to remind myself of, oh, I could be working on this one piece, or I could be developing a training plan, or just what am I meant to be doing? So taking out job descriptions periodically and reviewing them. One caveat that you would want in your job description is a list of duties and responsibilities for your employees. Doesn't have to be totally comprehensive because duties change, ebbs and flows. Employees don't work on the same thing every single day. But adding a bullet point in there that says other duties as assigned. Now, you want to make sure that the other duties are within a reasonable scope of the job. If you're hiring an administrative assistant and you ask them to go fix the roof, that could be another duty as assigned, but is it reasonable within their scope? So having clearly written job descriptions can help you, help your employees, help the organization. And understand that they will change over time as people change, organizations change, jobs change. The next piece of recruiting documentation that you would like is job postings. And job postings are not the total job description. Job postings are, in effect, a marketing piece. They're meant to attract qualified candidates that say, yes, I want to work at that organization. I want to do that job. If you just copy and paste the job description, most people aren't going to read it. They're just going to read the title and a few words and then just apply. And it's reading a full job description is not nearly as attractive as reading a fun, interesting job posting that really grabs somebody's attention. And equal employment opportunity is compliance surrounding recruiting. Equal employment opportunity is states that organizations' job is to hire the best qualified candidate for the position, regardless of any of the protected classes, which include age, race, religion, national origin, disability status, veteran status, and other protected core classes. There's more out there, but those are just a few. And so with EEO, the documentation surrounding that is having a clearly written EEO um, policy. It's having it on the application. When you're recruiting, whether you recruit digitally and you receive resumes or you're accepting paper applications, that having an application that is in addition to the resume can help protect your company because you get the employee information or the applicant information, but then you also can have a caveat in there that says, everything in this application is true to the best of my knowledge, and I understand there may be consequences if I provide false information. You can get an employee attestation that they can perform the essential job functions with or without reasonable accommodation. You can have other attestations in a separate application that you don't get in a paper resume. But Anne, you're only talking about recruiting. What happens when we're interviewing? And the interview notes. Interview notes are key. As an employer, you're out there hiring employees and searching for candidates. Keep notes of the questions that you're asking candidates. Keep notes of their responses and keep notes as to why you made one hiring decision as opposed to another. As employers, our responsibility is to hire the most qualified candidate. And a lot of times, because we are human, we go with our gut. And by making a gut decision, it's not easy to document that. If you have an interview notes and you keep their responses, you can make decisions off of that rather than trying to remember, oh, well, they said that they beat up their last manager and that's why I didn't hire them. As opposed to we interviewed Anne and she smiled, she gave great answers, she can handle situations. Or we didn't hire Anne because she said that she beat up her last manager. Those may or may not be valid reasons. That was just an example. So keeping those interview notes. And then when you hire a candidate, keeping their application, their notes, and any other interviewing documentation in their employee file. With interview notes, keep just the facts. It could be that you need to produce the notes that you're taking. I always think of, is this going to have to go in front of a judge or a jury? What are they going to say? Documentation can really help an organization, but it can also harm an organization. And so just the facts with the interview notes. Yesterday, I was talking to a group and they asked about, do I ask each candidate the same exact questions or do we go on the fly? It depends on what your organization style is. Some organizations really want very structured interviews in which they ask the same exact questions of each candidate and then they know the responses. When I'm interviewing, I don't like to make it very interviewee. It should be a conversation. I found that as I have a conversation, I can get more information from a candidate to determine if they're going to be the best for the job. And so I still have a list of interview questions I'd like to ask, but then we can go off topic and I want to dig deeper. And then there's appropriate and inappropriate interview questions. What are some inappropriate questions that you may have heard during interviews? Throw it in the chat. Do you have kids? That is totally job related. I'm going to bring my kids and they're going to be my assistants on the job. I jest. That is not an appropriate interview question. How old they are? That may be relevant due to certain statutes regarding the job, but it's not always relevant. If I'm hiring an admin, I don't need to know how old they are. I need to know if they're familiar with Microsoft Office. I need to know if they are comfortable using a phone. I need to know that they can use a computer. I don't need to know how old they are. If you're operating heavy machinery or dangerous equipment, there are laws around how old somebody has to be able to operate that. I've gotten the married question before, and I was interviewing for an HR manager job. It was going to be the head of HR, and they asked me, "Are you married?" And I had to take a step back. Like, is this a test? Are they testing me if I know my HR stuff? And so I responded, I don't see how that's relevant to the job, but no, I'm not. I didn't get the job. And are you a single mother? None of these. Do you have kids? Are you married? Are you a single mom? Do you have a car? None of these are job related. The do you have a car question, it doesn't matter if they have a car or not. The question should be, are you able to show up to work when we need you to be here? So, familiarizing yourself with the inappropriate interview questions and making sure that you keep the interview job related. Asking somebody, can they lift 50 pounds repeatedly, may be job related. But do you go to the gym frequently doesn't may not have any relevance. So familiarizing yourself with that. And then keeping notes of the interviews.
And
Before I move on, are there any questions?
I received a direct message in the chat with a question around interview notes from candidates that weren't hired. Is there a rule of thumb for how long to keep those on hand?
So depending upon your organization, it's I keep them for 3 years. And when I mentioned that we keep applications and interview notes for 3 years, I got some pushback. And I love pushback because it makes me think. So I did some research, and best practice is anywhere from 1 to 3 years. So just depending upon your organization and what you want to do, may depend on how much storage space you have. But I always kept things for 3 years. But that 1 to 3 is how long you should keep them. So thank you for that. Are there any other questions?
And another question just came in the chat from Julie, who's wondering how to keep interview notes to just the facts when you are using your gut, trying to determine if they will be a good fit.
So we're human. We use our guts, right? We go off our intuition. And but it doesn't really sit well when I write, oh, I just didn't feel like they'd be a great fit. Um, so I dig deeper about something they may have said in their response. Or I do ask the same questions to all candidates and then may go off topic with them. And so personally, I just keep asking questions. But then it is also our job is to hire the most qualified candidate. So if we have a stellar candidate that we've already interviewed and we're just seeing that maybe there's somebody else out there, which is another topic for another day, but it's who is the most qualified. So we could have Anne who can work every single shift and pick up overtime and lives our values and can demonstrate that she'll work within our values. Or we have Anne who could show up to work on time, can pick up shifts, but really doesn't live one of our values. If our value is transparency, and I asked Anne about a time when she had to be transparent with her boss or with her team, and she hems and she haws, or she says, well, I like to keep most things to myself and then share the big picture with them. So digging a little bit deeper can help you identify the most qualified candidate. It helps to give yourself space and to really focus on the candidate so that you can pick up on those nuances when they're speaking. and really knowing what the job requires and asking questions to those. Did that answer the question? We can spend hours upon hours talking about interviews. The so it reminds me of a story. I was interviewing for a phone operator for a hotel, and the person answered all of the questions great. She had a beautiful smile in her voice, and she's handled customer service before, but there was something in my gut that says something's wrong. But I'm just one person. And I said that there's a hiring team. So let's have the hiring manager interview this person just to see what they say. And so the candidate and the hiring manager scheduled, but the candidate called to reschedule. So they rescheduled, and then the candidate no showed. And so that was the reason they didn't show up to the interview. A few weeks later, I received a certified letter. And when I opened it up and I read it, it was a threatening letter that says, "You need to watch your back. How dare you did this?" I'm like, what do I do? I called the police. The police showed up, and he sees, and he's like, "Oh, my girlfriend at Tiffany just got the same exact letter." So I was working a hotel. Tiffany is retail. I'm like, what do we have in common? We hired from the same applicant pool. And I'm like, oh, I know. So it was the candidate that I had this feeling in my gut. Now, not every candidate that you have a gut feeling about is going to send you a threatening letter, but welcome to the world of employees and people management. Thank you for letting me share that story. And then once you recruit and interview and you find the most qualified candidate, you hire them. And this is where we really get into the documentation. HR loves paperwork, and there are a lot of pitfalls that employers can fall into with incorrect documentation surrounding onboarding. The I-9 is the authorization to work in the US. It's what proves identity and that work authorization. It must be employees, new employees must fill it out and provide documentation within 3 days of hire. If they don't, then they're not working. And I have a soft spot for employees. I'm like, oh, you can just give me the documentation at the end of the week, or I understand and your parents are overnighting it. And that's no, this is a big piece of liability. If the Department of Labor comes in for an I-9 audit, there's we're seeing this outside of Department of Labor, and ICE is coming in. So making sure that all of your employees are authorized to work in the US. If not, it can be fines, and they can be several $1,000s, which can harm an organization. So just, well, be on the safe side, take a side of caution, and make sure that your I-9s are all in order. There is a great, through the Department of Labor website, you can review I-9 documentation, make sure that it's compliant. And I recommend an I-9 audit quarterly, just to make sure that you do have valid authorization for everybody on file, that you do have all of your I's dotted and your T's crossed. The next piece of documentation you'll need is the federal W-4. This is the tax form that employees fill out. We are not tax advisors, or I'm not. And so employees would ask me to help fill out their tax form. Man, it's complicated. So I advise them to take it back, review it with, if they have a bookkeeper or accountant, their spouse or somebody, to fill out the W-4 correctly. There's the Montana W-4 that you should have on file from your employees. New hire reporting, whether you file it online or send it in paperwork. The offer letter. On an offer letter, and that sounds so corporate. We don't want to be a corporate. I understand. that can help protect the organization. It removes ambiguity surrounding the terms and conditions of employment. And it doesn't have to be this grand 3-page document of everything that you're expecting from your employees. But with an offer letter, start date, rate of pay, if they're exempt, non exempt, and the caveat that says this is not a contract, it's not a guarantee of employment. We follow the Montana probationary period, whether you have 12 months or if your organization has something less. But that can remove any ambiguity. It can also remove ambiguity with, oh, I was promised $23 an hour and you're paying me 21. There's some gray area there, so just put it in writing. You sign, you get the new hire to sign, or you send it to them electronically, but just have it in writing that they understand that it's not a contract, there's a probationary period, the rate of pay, and then other things could be added with you can expect your first performance review in January, or you can expect XYZ from your manager. And then I also attach the job description and ask them to review it and sign off and acknowledge that they received it. Again, removing some of that ambiguity. On the first day of the job, it can be exciting. It can be we have a lot of emotion surrounding it, and our brains may not be retaining everything that our employer shares with us. So putting some of these things in writing can really help. And then having a document with, or if you take it electronically, the personal information, emergency contact information, direct deposit authorization, and then you get their social and their birth date and all of that. Having the employee complete all of that information is beneficial because it again removes that ambiguity in that gray areas. And then if you conduct background checks or drug tests, to have those consent forms and retain those in a separate confidential employee file. Which reminds me, confidential employee files. Um, when you're setting up your new employee files, whether you do them electronically or on paper, not every hiring manager or supervisor needs to see every single piece of information about an employee. Medical information, the personal identification information like socials and birth dates, any workers' comp information should all be kept in a separate confidential file. What managers and supervisors should have access to are any disciplinary notes or performance appraisals or anything related to performance that may be relevant for the manager to know. What questions do you have surrounding the onboarding documentation? Excellent. There's a lot of it. And we're spending all of our time getting paperwork filled out, and we're not doing much training. I know. When you have employees, there's a lot of information you need to get from them. And I can't manage. We can't serve our clients. I know there's a lot surrounding it. So with training, it's great to hold on to any training plans that you have. Any, I like manuals and I like hard covers, and I know that it's not very forward or future friendly and digitally friendly, but I like having hard copies. So I do have an HR manual that I've written hard copy so I can refer to it. So I don't have to go into the search function on my laptop. But those training manuals, training plans, methods of training are great to have written down. When you're onboarding somebody, and maybe you have a dedicated trainer to onboard them, or you have a team of people that are taking up different sections of the training for them, it's helpful to have that training documentation so that the exact information is shared from one person to the next. If we rely on memory, then there's information that may get lost. I train differently than the next person. And so I think that training them on Office is crucial. And so that's what I focus on. But I gloss over training them on the verbiage that we want this admin to use when they're answering the phone. Somebody else may think that the customer service verbiage is very important. And they're just kind of like, oh, you could go online and learn all about Office. So having training plans and manuals that is shared across can help make sure that the information that's shared is consistent. Having conversations with your employees, if there's room to grow and to learn, having those documented so that you can put somebody on a development plan that they can grow into. It's goal oriented and they're excited about the opportunities. That doesn't mean that you have to have a position for that employee to move into or to promote into. But humans have an innate need to learn. So just giving learning opportunities can help. So having conversations and taking notes on the development plans and the learning plans for employees. Succession planning is again part of that development plan for an employee. Succession plan is a development plan for your entire organization. What happens when somebody leaves? Do you have a plan for making sure that the information is passed down? Do you have a plan for people picking up the additional responsibilities that they may leave? Do you have a plan for when an employee resigns, we need to make sure that we post the position, interview, and have somebody in place? So succession planning and documenting it. All of the documentation should be accessible to pertinent people within your organization so that if you have one person that holds on to all of it and something happens to them, they leave, they win the lottery, they're peacing out and buying a place in Curacao, then you have this documentation plan to make sure that the organization continues when they leave. Onboarding plans, employee check-ins, and employee reviews should all be part of the employee file, and you're able to reference it at any time. Whether the employee is starting to fail in their job and you need to have that conversation with them, you can reference the expectations that you set during the onboarding. You can have the 30, 60, 90-day check-ins that, yes, they were picking this up, check, or no, we need to spend more time on this aspect of their job. And then those employee check-ins, not everything needs to be documented word for word, but it could just be, I checked in with Anne on October 24th, and she mentioned that she needs a little bit more training in this. So documenting that, you could document the training that Anne got, and then everything's copacetic. And then the employee reviews or performance appraisals, whatever organization, there's a million different words out there. With performance reviews, document the review itself and the conversation with the employee. There's a lot of talk around performance reviews and the performance management and how we handle them. And depending upon how your organization uses them, they should be documented. So I'm a huge fan of the quarterly check-ins and the quarterly reviews with employees. They shouldn't take as much time as the annual review. It's more frequent, so you're able to evaluate performance more frequently. And it focuses on goal setting. So moving the organization in the future, The organization has their goals and their mission that they're working towards. And then the employee with their goals they help further the organizational mission. So with performance reviews, if you do them more frequently, document those. More, if you are on the annual performance cycle, documenting that. With the annual performance cycle, a lot of times it's managers will sit down, they'll scratch through something, but the employee file is an important reference tool to make sure that the manager is documenting everything in the annual review that happened throughout the year, rather than just things that happened recently or happened in the beginning of the year. We miss everything in between if we don't use the employee file as a reference tool. What questions do you have surrounding performance review documentation? With the performance reviews, I know that the rating systems are popular and there's a lot of uh, questions about the rating system, but documenting manager training on how they should rate employees. If you have a 1 to 5 rating system, some managers will give everybody a 3. They may just say everybody meets expectations and we're going to use that. I've worked with some managers where everybody's a 5. Everybody's great. We don't want to offend anybody and give them a bad rating. So we're going to give everybody a 5. And then there's some that nobody's a 5, nobody's a 3. Everybody needs to improve. Training managers on the performance reviews and how to administer them can create consistency across the way that they're administered. And then documenting that. And we're doing so much documentation. When do we have time to manage? By laying out a thorough and thoughtful process, training your managers on it, it becomes rote. And then it just becomes part of the job. Documentation of conversations, of the disciplinary actions, they don't have to be novels. It could be succinct, just the facts, and for future reference. So often we are in our own way because we are looking at, I don't have time, I don't have the energy, it's been a long day, I'll handle it later. But having a thorough process and training your managers can to get into the habit of this can help save your organization a lot of time down the road. It can save a lot of headaches down the road. But Anne, documentation, I know it's kind of a 4-letter word, but it doesn't have to be. So now we're in the disciplinary action or the progressive actions, holding employees accountable, having those tough conversations. I don't like the word tough or difficult because they're just necessary conversations that organizations need to have to hold employees accountable, to help them grow within the organization. What challenges do you face when having these conversations? What challenges do you face when creating the documentation for it? Go ahead and drop them in the chat. None? Oh, phew. We'll just move on then. I'm kidding. I'm kidding. Hurting their feelings. The fear of offending somebody, of hurting their feelings, of saying the wrong thing, the fear of, oh, what if I have this conversation and they quit? The fear of there's a lot of fear that surrounds these. Like the fear of how are they going to react? Are they going to become angry and haul off on me? Another thing is how many written verbal before a PIP? Taking accountability on our end as a training issue versus an employee issue. Oh, that's a really good one. These are great. So there are, if you're a leader, if you have employees and you're managing people, then there's a lot of fear that goes into it. And a lot of it's just in our own heads and we're overthinking it. And so I have been there with just like, oh my gosh, I don't want to have this conversation because what if I offend them? What if I say the wrong thing? Another thing that I've thought is, well, if I don't address it, it's just going to go away. Usually it doesn't go away. Usually it comes back bigger than before. And so with having these accountability conversations and recognizing that something is becoming an issue, how do we do this? Uh, for there's a lot of tools that could be available within your organization. The employee handbook, that's another four-letter word, isn't it? Handbook, the mission, vision, values, job descriptions, time cards, and there's a number of other tools out there that can help to determine, okay, it's time to sit down and have a conversation. If somebody is late every single day for 3 weeks, and we're getting frustrated, and we're like, oh, this employee is not working out. We need to fire them right now. Take a step back and review the employee handbook, the vision, values, the employee file to see what's been done. Has this been addressed with the employee? If I'm an employee and I'm coming in late every single day for 3 weeks and nobody says anything, and I was like, oh, this is acceptable behavior. It's okay. Even though when I was first hired, they said you must be on time. Here's your schedule. The schedule comes out every Monday. If you're 1 minute late, it's late. Clear expectations were set in the beginning, but now I'm failing those expectations. So if nobody says anything to me, I'm assuming it's okay. So addressing the situation as it happens. And it could just be I'm working through a whole bunch of stuff and I I just my manager should just can talk about it and ask me what's happening and I can come forward and say, I'm working through a personal issue. Can I come in 15 minutes late every day for the next month? Yes or no? Can the organization make that happen? If not. But it starts with having this conversation. And when I'm having the conversation, I could be, well, how is Anne going to react if I address her tardiness? Is she going to become angry? Is she going to break down and cry? As a manager, I can prepare for some scenarios. I'm a big fan of role play. So finding a trusted advisor, my leader, my manager, and saying, would you mind helping me work through this situation? Would you mind being the employee and having this conversation with me? I take notes into these conversations because I know what I want to say. And in heightened situations where the fear of conflict may rise up, I want to have notes to make sure I hit my salient points. I want to make sure I give enough time to the conversation. Because if an employee does come back and say, oh, my mother's was just diagnosed with cancer and is going through chemo, I'm struggling with that. So giving the conversation time and focus that it needs. Or the employee could come back and say, well, I'm late because I just don't really like my job anymore. And then that's a different pathway that that conversation will go. So identifying why we're not having these conversations, but also reviewing the tools at your disposal to hold employees accountable and then using people on your team or trusted advisors to help work through it. When you have these conversations, they should be documented. And it doesn't have to be every single time I'm in a meeting with an employee, I'm going to be taking notes. I'm going to make sure it becomes part of their file. I could just have a conversation with them like, hey, Ann, I've noticed that you're late. What's going on? And if I have that conversation a couple times, then I start putting pen to paper and saying, this is more formal. You need to start showing up on time. You are now on notice that this could be lead to termination. So documenting those. In Montana, with the Wrongful Discharge and Employment Act, their employers have a 1 year probationary period in which they can release employees at any time, with or without notice, with or without cause. After they've satisfied their probationary period, then employees can be terminated for cause. And when identifying for cause, you could say that Anne could be fired for being late, and I've told her 3 times. But if there's no record of those conversations, Anne comes back and says, oh, I never knew. I just thought you were telling me to show up on time, so I showed up on time. So documenting whether it's a verbal, a written, depending upon what your organization's practice is. Again, I'm not an employment attorney and this is not legal advice, but if you have an employee attorney that you can consult on what they recommend as best practice. For me, I've followed a verbal, which is documented, a written, a final written, and then termination. However, it does depend on the situation. It does depend on the organization and what you've already established in your policies. Oh, question came in. Do we have to have them sign the documentation? Excellent question. And there's a few scenarios surrounding that. When it's a written warning and it's formal, with a verbal warning, I just send an email, a recap that says, Anne, thank you for your time. Here's a recap of our conversation. We talked about your attendance. You acknowledged it. You said you were going to start showing up on time. I'm here to support you in what you need. And then with a written, it's more formal. And for that, I do give the employee the opportunity to sign. And it's an acknowledgement that they're aware of this conversation. If they refuse to sign, I just write refuse to sign. But the conversation still happened. Some employers want the manager, the employee, and a witness. And then everybody signs the documentation. So for their signature, it's acknowledgement that the conversation happened. It's not agreement. And then some employees may refuse to sign, but that doesn't negate that the conversation happened and they're still on notice that they need to improve. Does that answer the question? And then anything that an employee does sign, I offer them a copy of it. Um, just it's going to be part of their file anyway. If they want a copy, I give them a copy. A question came up about performance improvement plans. And there's, like most things, it depends. Some organizations absolutely do not do performance improvement plans. Some organizations do. When I hear a PIP, I start thinking, oh, the employer, my boss just wants to paper my file to fire me. So that's the perception around PIPs. With the verbal and the written and the final written or whatever steps your organization follows, a PIP doesn't have to be a part of that. It just depends on what your employer wants. The the verbal, the written, those are telling employees, you need to get better. These are the shortcomings. Here's how we can support you. And after that, I still check in with employees after they receive a written just to see how things are going. What else can I do to help? So, depending upon what your organization wants, you want a PIP, you don't want a PIP, they're not a necessary part of the documentation process. Um, and then the second part of that question was after how many warnings do we give? Do we put somebody on a PIP? Again, HR's favorite answer is it depends. I am so sorry, that's not very helpful. Um, but it depends. And then the third piece of employee relations documentations is investigation notes and outcomes. If you receive a claim from an employee, whether it's a discrimination or unfair pay or harassment or whatever an employee comes forward with, if you conduct an investigation, keep the notes and the outcomes of it. Investigations should maintain confidentiality. They should be talking to witnesses, should be taking witness statements. When possible, getting the witness statements in writing from them, and then holding on to those in a separate file with the notes of the outcomes. If you receive a harassment claim that and a manager is harassing their employee and you conduct the investigation, you get the witness notes, and it turns out like that you determine that this is a terminable offense. You want to have documentation of that thought process in case. You keep it for in case something similar happens to help that decision making process. And then you also have it in case the manager who was fired comes back and says, I was fired for harassment, but that's a wrongful termination. So to hold on to all of those. I hope none of you all have anything like that come up. But it's part of having employees, right?
And there
What
was
part?
one more
Yes.
question in the chat from Anj that received a couple thumbs up, so I wanted to bring it up, which is a challenge is recognizing something is becoming an issue early enough to begin documentation. Um, I'm curious if you have input on that.
So it's the ambiguity of being a manager, right? It's oh, I'm going to let Anne's tardiness slide this one time because it's unlike her and she doesn't do it. To Anne's manager lets it slide for 3 weeks and then Anne's manager says, oh my gosh, she's late. I'm going to fire her. So the right time is somewhere in between that. But knowing your policies in and out, knowing the expectations that you set for the employees and the following the employee handbook, mission, vision, values, job descriptions, clear expectations, training plans. Is it right to address it after it happens one time? Maybe. Is it right to, and then, or yes, absolutely. Or it could just be a conversation with, and I noticed that you're showing up to late and you've been late a couple times this week. What's going on? So maybe that conversation doesn't lead to formal documentation, but it's just checking in with your employee because something is unusual about their behavior. What's going on? Is there some way I can support them in their job so that they can do their job better? Are they facing something at home that's affecting their job? Maybe we can, she can take some time off and figure it out. So really just approaching it in as a conversation as to, oh man, I want to write this person up. I want to get rid of this person. So I'm going to start noticing every time they do something wrong. And then a lot of times I get those calls with, and we have to fire somebody right now, right today. And so my question is the employee aware of their poor behavior, of their misgivings, of their failure to perform? Is the employee, have you sat down to have this conversation? So if you, I was going to say, if you feel like it's a problem, but again, there's that gut feeling, right? But one thing when you're managing employees is you want your management to be fair and consistent. And there may be that one employee that you don't like, but they're performing to expectations. They're great with clients. We're humans. We're not going to really, do we have to like everybody? Or as a manager, do I have to make sure I'm holding people accountable consistently? And so there's a lot of questions surrounding humanness when it comes to management. Oh my gosh, that sounds so touchy-feely. Yes, human resources. We are humans. We're going to make mistakes. We're going to have to identify our own shortcomings when we're managing people. We're going to have to put our own personal biases to the side when we're managing people. Does that answer the question about recognizing when to have these conversations? Another thing is that if you're not holding employees accountable in a timely manner, the employees who are meeting or exceeding expectations start to notice. And it can be a detriment to high employee morale if somebody is able to slide or if they're seen as a favorite. And so maintaining fairness and consistency across the board is key when managing people. Did that answer everybody's questions about employee relations? I'm sure it didn't. I mean, that is such a big topic. We could talk for days about it. Then safety compliance and documentation is some of your organizations be um, may have to fall into OSHA compliance, which includes the OSHA logs and forms and keeping track of all of the accidents that happen. In Montana, we also have the Montana Safety Culture Act. And for employers with 5 or 6 employees, you should have regular trainings for your employee, safety trainings for your employees, document the safety training, have a safety committee that meets regularly to talk about safety and educate employees about safety, and have a documented safety program. The Montana Safety Culture Act has a good website to check to see if your organization falls under it and needs to be in compliance. And it talks about industries that do need it, may not need it. So check there or with your employment attorney. In terms of other terms of safety, when you have workers' comp insurance, your workers' comp carrier is a resource to, most of them will come into your work site and say, and give you feedback on the safety at the work site. But the documentation surrounding safety is having a first report or an accident report that you need to submit to claims, check with your carrier about what their requirements are, and use your workers' comp carrier as a resource. That's why they're there. They want to keep your premiums low. So use them, tap into their knowledge. They're there to help you. And then OSHA is for employers of a certain size, do need to keep the OSHA logs and post them in February for a few months. Does anybody keep records about near misses? So those almost accidents that don't become accidents? Just keep, oh, ah, I love it. keeping your workplaces safe. So when you know about those near misses, you can help prevent those accidents and injuries further. Oh, fantastic. And then offboarding. And offboarding could be, when I talk about offboarding or termination, it's voluntary or involuntary. If it's voluntary, somebody has submitted a resignation and they may be moving on to a job that they've always wanted. It's their dream job. Or they could be leaving because they are relocating to the Caribbean, or for whatever reason, they're leaving on their own volition. If you have an employee that does resign their position, get it in writing, whether it's an email that says, I'm quitting, I'm out of here, effective immediately. I've had somebody write on a post-it note, I quit, and then that became part of their employee file. But get it from them what their, if you can, what their expected last date of work is, and so that you can offboard them appropriately. If it's an involuntary termination and you're firing somebody for cause, I do give them a termination letter that states the steps. So we talked about Anne's attendance on October 1st, October 15th, and October 24th, and now it's led to termination. And I give that to the employee just for their reference. If they wanted to sue us, I've had employees take it to an attorney, and the attorney said, this is pretty solid. There's no case here. So some organizations don't want those termination letters. It depends on the individual organization. If you do offer medical benefits, then offering the continuation of benefits through COBRA. And there's specific dates and timelines surrounding COBRA notification and if an employee does want to select it. So making sure that you get that out in within the time frame that's needed. Other benefits may have conversion or portability. It's life insurance, if it's, are they rolling over their 401k or their 403b? What are the parameters around that? So informing employees of what's happening with their benefits. With their final paycheck, if they resigned, you pay them out on the next payday. If they're terminated and you do not have it expressly stated somewhere in your policies that they'll be paid out on the next payday, you must present them with a final paycheck within 4 hours of their termination. So somewhere get it in your policies that your termination policy says if somebody is terminated involuntarily, they'll be paid on their next payday or 15 days, whichever is sooner. And then exit interviews. If you do conduct exit interviews, keep notes of them, and then they become part of the employee file. On the flip side, I don't do exit interviews just because when somebody's leaving, they may already be halfway out the door and the information they give me may not be very valid. And they could just be ranting, they're over it. Who knows what their mind frame is? So while an employee is there, I conduct stay interviews. And these are employee check ins just to get their feedback. How are they doing? What can I do to support them? What's going on? What do they like about their job? What would make them leave or tempt them to leave? And keeping those stay interviews just for reference to help check in with employees can help increase employee retention and can help create a great employee experience. So I keep notes from the stay interviews as well. And all of this documentation I keep, a lot of it's for me because my memory, we have a lot going on and trying to remember everything. So having these points of reference can help create a great employee experience as well. What questions do you have about offboarding compliance documentation? With when an employee leaves and you have their digital file or their hard copy file, best practice is keep those for 6 plus 1. So 7 years, you hold on to those files, much like payroll records. With workers' comp, that needs to be in a separate file. And workers' comp, you hold on for, oh, I apologize, either 10 years or 30 years. Check with your carrier about that. And I think that's any other questions about employee or document retention? How long do you hold on to certain documents? Any questions, comments, concerns in general? So in the beginning, you wanted to hear about giving staff feedback. Do you have some tips and pointers about giving staff feedback? Document retention. I think I covered most of it. Anywhere from 1 to 7 years, or workers' comp, you hold on to for a long time. Documentation can help reduce risk and liability for your organization. Clear, concise documentation helps remove ambiguity, release those gray areas that can pop up. It's not going to take care of every single gray situation because we're human and we're employees are going to throw some things at us that we don't know what to do. But clear, concise documentation can help reduce that risk and liability. There's no difference between 6 plus 1 or 7 years. It's the extra. So some uh, regulations say to keep them for 6 years, and then holding them on to an extra year for that seventh is just in case any audits come up, any claims come up. So no difference. The When I'm purging documents, I do everything at the beginning of the year. Excellent. So at the beginning of the year, I purge everything from the last 7 years or everything from the last 3 years, just so I'm not going through each month and destroying documents. And so it just helps me remember, okay, we're in 2025. I hold on to everything from 2019. And then in 2026, in January, I do a document destroy, just so I'm not going through every single month.
And I
Somebody,
received a direct message with a question about generally for an organization that might be closing. What does document retention look like in that setting or situation if kind of the operating structure of the organization is changing, whether that's whatever that looks like, but either closing or kind of the operation structure of a nonprofit's changing, what documentation should be held on to.
that is a really good question. I've gone through a a reduction in force for a department. And so holding for that, the company was still staying forth, but we were closing a department. And so we still had to hold on to the employee files. With the RIF, we had a meeting with the department. We provided severance. Those severance agreements became part of the employee files, and we held on to those for 7 years. In another organization, had to, they had, they were, they hired somebody to maintain the documents. They got a storage facility and kept all of them there and then purged according to their retention schedule. I've been through a merger, and the company that bought my employer held retained most of the employees. And so they held on to all of those employee files. For the employees that they did not hold on to, they so I was a I was staying with my current employer as a transfer. And so we transferred my file to my new location. And then the for the employees that are not staying throughout the merger, those documents, depending upon if the company is still going to stay in some iteration, stays with the company in some iteration. That's a really good question too. Check with your employment attorney on those. Because I'm just speaking from my own personal experience without having much knowledge on mergers, acquisitions, or closings. Those
And
are really good questions, though.
I know everyone. I'm like, ooh, I received
Stumping me.
another question in the chat wondering if you can review which documentation does not go in the employee's file but is tracked separately.
SHRM has a really good breakdown of what stays in the employee file. So I'll send that to Chloe for her to send out because that it's
And
more comprehensive than what I can go through on my own.
great. Yeah, and I'll send that out in a follow-up email, everybody, so we'll be able to have that resource. And then another direct question in the chat with how do you find an employment attorney? Any suggestions for folks in town or ways to get connected with somebody in that line of work?
Oh, that's a great question. There's so many good ones in town. Um, I am not through my own personal experience, but I'll send Chloe a list of three or four and it's not a recommendation. It's not just, I'm not endorsing anybody, but I'll send those to Chloe and she can send those out with their contact information. These are great questions. Thank you. Is there anything else? If anything pops up and you just want to give me a call, I'm happy to help. Um, yes, I am a human resources consultant, but I do offer free discovery calls or free consultations. So, and the nonprofits in our community are outstanding and phenomenal. And the work that you do is just impactful and inspiring. So, thank you all very much for the work that you do in our community.
I love that closing, Anne. Thank you so much for your time today. I know I am walking away with um, new ideas for systems to implement that'll save our organization time and stress, and I hope you are too. I'll be sending a follow-up email with the slides, a documentation checklist that Anne generously shared, and the resources that were discussed today. That email will also include a survey to this session. Please fill that out. It really helps us create programming that is applicable and helpful to you and your organization. And then I'll also get the recording of this up on One Valley's YouTube, hopefully by Monday, end of day. Um, our next nonprofit cafe session will be in person in November on reducing burnout in mission-driven work. So continuing on that humanness that Anne talked about. Thank you so much for your time today. Please reach out if One Valley can support you or your organization in any way. We're in your corner, and I hope you have a restful weekend. Thanks, everybody.